Just confirming that you can just see just the slide and not any notes or anything. I get a verbal confirmation from someone.
Yes, it's fine.
Perfect. Thanks, Karen. Just
They're always,
confirming that
all
you
the
can just
settings are
see
always changing.
just the slide and not any notes or anything. I get a verbal confirmation from someone.
Correct.
All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, folks. Welcome to another session of Dear Neighbor with the U.S. Federation of the Sisters of St. Joseph. My name is Lisa. I serve as the JPIT coordinator. And I'm delighted we're going to have a really full session today, a good conversation around some exciting work that's happening in two of our congregations. So we just ask you to remain muted throughout the session. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat while we go. And just know that this video is being live streamed on our YouTube channel. So if you wanted to access the recording later, you can do that. Again, happy to have you here. Mary Ellen is going to lead us in prayer, and then we'll talk a little bit more about land justice features and focus communities.
So let us be mindful of those among us who are suffering, particularly our sisters in Lebanon. I received an email just before we started today from Judy Donovan, and situation in Lebanon is very dire. So we remember those sisters in our prayers. And we begin. Stimulated by the Holy Spirit of love and receptive to the Spirit's inspirations, we move always towards profound love of God and love of neighbor without distinction, from whom we do not separate ourselves, and for whom, in the following of Christ, we work in order to achieve unity of neighbor with neighbor and neighbor with God. In humility, the spirit of the incarnate Word. In sincere charity, the manner of St. Joseph, whose name we bear. In an Ignatian Cilician climate, that is, with an orientation towards excellence, tempered by gentleness, peace, and joy. And we pray Maxim 16. Fix your heart on God's dream. Let it guide everything. Practice love and gratitude everywhere. And to this we say, Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. So again, like I mentioned, my name is Lisa. I'm hosting this month's session, and I'm delighted to be joined by a couple folks that we'll introduce in a moment about land justice features and the focus communities cohorts. First we'll share a little brief video about what land justice is, but I wanted to tell you that soon you'll hear from Sister Joan Gallagher, who's on the land justice futures team for the community in Brentwood, and also Sister Peggy Comfrey, who's a Sister St. Joseph out of Boston and part of their focus community team. They are in different stages of this process, and you'll learn a little bit more about that. But again, feel free if you have questions or intrigue, we welcome those comments. So I will, like I said, share a video in a moment. But first, I just want to frame this a little bit. So we know that in 2015, Laudato Si was released, right? As an encyclical. And then more recently, last fall, Laudato Deum was released. And these are really calls to integral ecology, to understand that as our charism promotes, all is one. And also that we are called to both, for ecological transformation to occur, we must pay attention to the cries of the earth, the cries of the poor. We must pay attention to how these systems of oppression have been interwoven throughout time, and to really recognize, both that our, as members of the Catholic Church, we're called to repair and to heal. and to acknowledge where harm has been done. So you may or may not have heard about a project called Nuns and Nuns, Nuns and Nuns. Out of this group of seekers and sisters came an endeavor that started a few years ago used to be called the Land Justice Project. And it has since evolved a little bit to be called Land Justice Future. So if you ever see those terms kind of interwoven, they mean one and the same thing. So we'll hear in a moment from one of the co-founders of the Land Justice Futures experience about the main tenets of land justice. So let me cue that up on my screen here, 1 second. Okay. So my sound is enabled, great. Okay, so this is about 90 seconds or so. So you'll hear from Sarah Bradley, who's one of the co-founders.
We define land justice as the practice of centering social, racial, and ecological justice in decisions about how land is used, loved, and governed by people. There are three key and intertwined components of land justice. First, protecting land from extractive development. Second, regenerating the health of ecosystems. And third, shifting equity and control of land to communities who have been systemically dispossessed of land, especially Black and Indigenous stewards. Our hope by the end of this session is that you will know a whole lot more about land justice and why it's needed. We hope you will come away with an understanding of how the church and its purported doctrine of discovery created the conditions of our extractive economy and private property system, as well as the outcome of those projects, namely the climate crisis and pervasive and systemic racism. It's also our hope that you'll come away with an understanding of how land justice, including concrete examples of it, can be the medicine that moves us towards racial and ecological justice, and how you can be an active part of this movement.
So again, we're centering ecological, racial healing in this work. And one of the there's a couple of different components of Land Justice Futures, and I'll have someone on the tech team just drop their generic website in case you've never heard of them into the chat at some point today. But one of the offerings they have is they do a lot of public education programs. And so you see here that this is on YouTube. They have a whole catalog of great resources, really centering the voices of Indigenous and Black stewards of land, of centering folks who are really closest to the realities of extractivism and closest to the realities of imagining another way forward. In today's Maxim, we talk about God's dream. And I think that in this work for land justice, for ecological healing and repair and relational repair, we're attempting, imperfectly, of course, to live out God's dream, that all might be one. So Land Justice Futures has some of those public-facing educational opportunities that are, it's a really, really rich resource. They also have begun a couple years ago a cohort program for women religious to journey together to consider what would it look like for us to really center these principles of land justice as we make plans for our land, for our buildings, for the ways that we're called to live out our charism, whatever that charism might be, right? This is not unique to the Sisters of St. Joseph, but it is open to religious communities across the United States and Canada. And so the community in Brentwood was one of the inaugural cohorts. And so I'm going to introduce Joan. I'll have Joan and Peggy get on Spotlight just so we can see them. Great. And Joan, actually, I think you're going to share some slides. So Joan's part of the land justice team over in Brentwood, among a couple other folks. So I will pass it over to you.
Thank you. Great. Yes, so this is our second year as one of the focus communities, and I share this really this work, this privilege of being part of this group with Land Justice Futures with Susan Wilcox and Karen Burke. And you know, like Lisa said, in 2015, Laudato Si was published by Pope Francis. And just shortly before that, we as a congregation had affirmed a land ethic. And in and around that time, we were also working with the group that was helping us to look at our resources, be it membership, properties, and whatever. And using trends, you know, they helped us come up with some good information. And looking at who we are and where we wanted to go and the times, we know we needed to continue God's dream and also continue to weave our story of active, inclusive love. And so working with groups like the Conic Land Trust, who've been a great guide, they put us in relationship with the Shinnecock people who really approached us about needing a site to bury some of the ancestral remains that were rematriated to them. And they just so happened to find that sacred spot in our sacred grounds, our ancestral burial grounds in our cemetery here in Brentwood. And it was a beautiful ritual that they invited to, and thus became the start of a beautiful relationship. We also knew that we needed to begin to really educate ourselves to the plight of our neighbors, really those who have been here for millennia and who welcomed us as neighbors. So one of our Earth Matters members put us in touch with Conscience Point, which was a documentary about what is going on with the Shinnecock people and how their land has been taken and treaties been broken and not adhered to. And we happen to have land in Hampton Bays. This red circle shows the Shinnecock Reservation. And just in this area is where we have a vacation retreat house that we have been using since 1960. And so knowing that all of this was Shinnecock land, it really had us to begin to think, you know, what should we do? So we continue to build our relationships, learn more of what the Shinnecock were really fighting for in terms of their life and their generativity, and standing with them and becoming allies with them. And then one day we got an email from Becky, who's one of the wisdom figures, and they were looking at Shinnecock Bay, where it just is right within their reservation and where we are in Hampton Bays. And they were looking to restore the waters and also to begin a kelp farming initiative. So with the name of Shinnecock, how could we say no? And so here we go. You know, as we began with 6 women and Jean-Pierre Médaille, there were these 6 intergenerational Shinnecock women who wanted to begin kelp farming. And they were guided by a nice man named Toby from Greenwave, who really guided them in starting up the project. And it was around that time that the Land Justice Project got wind of this, and they began a land justice series of which we participated in. And it didn't go past us that they also were 6 women who were starting this endeavor. And so when they began the cohort program, they invited us to be a part of it. So we filled out a very simple application. We had 1 year and now we're in the 2nd year. And so what I'd like to do is, instead of me speaking for the Shinnecock, just to show you a very short clip of what the Weather Channel did to explain their work and how they called us to really divide the city and cure its ills.
I sang to the kelp because I wanted to know that I care about it.
Maybe we can't hear them singing back, but I bet you they are.
It probably has helped keep us alive for the last 10,000 years.
You can't help but know that God is there. This is the Shinnecock Kelp Farmers Hatchery in here. The Sisters of St. Joseph have had a strong relationship with the Shinnecock Nation.
We are a rogue group of 6 women who came together to fight climate change.
These women, they have a purpose, and theirs is to protect and bring life to the bay.
There was a 99% die-off of scallops. There has been a lot of overdevelopment in this area, and it was declared a federal disaster area for shell fisheries, resources that we depend on to keep our traditional way of living alive.
The benefits of kelp farming is taking the bad nitrogens we put in the bay out, sending back oxygen, which is a necessary source for the health of the bay.
And purifying the waters so that it can once again teem with life that will provide sustenance and further filtration of the waters. Kelp is a mighty being. So when these Shinnecock kelp farming women asked for kelp, how could we say no?
Everyone has had water changed, and everyone's tucked in. Seaweed in general has been a part of our traditional lifestyle here. We used it as insulation, we used it for cooking. We hope to eventually be able to offer it as food quality.
You never would have imagined that one day we would be working together, actually as a family.
We got a sisterhood going on.
It truly is, and I feel like the kelp farmers our adopted family.
It really is a win-win. It's a virtuous circle.
As you walk and you move out into those waters, to hold the spools, you, among many, spoke kind words to. Talk about running it so that life will come forth. Life that is necessary if we're going to have clean waters.
We call it silent nation. The seaweed can't talk. We have to protect it. It can't go to the board meeting of the town hall and say, you're polluting us and you need to stop. We have to speak for our seaweed.
This is all about what we can do to heal the wounds that are happening in nature right now.
What their work in restoring the waters is doing, not only for today, but for generations to come, I think the Creator is taking great delight. And so when we began this program, we really realized that we need more education ourselves as a focus community and then the larger community. So we would invite members of the Shinnecock Nation as part of a land trust that they had set up, the Neomuck Land Trust, and the kelp farmers to really educate us to the land, to their story, their true story. And we looked to set out a cultural easement on the land at 81 Lynn Avenue. And as Becky pointed out to us, it's happening because Denise over here is an artist, Wiedemo, who created this mural on one of the buildings at 81 Lynn, which really tells their story. And then we invited our sister, Priscilla Solomon, who was with the Sault Ste. Marie congregation, to do a retreat about reconciling with the land, with the people, in particular those of the BIPOC communities, which was a very powerful experience because within it, we were able to enter into the blanket exercise that tells the story of discovery from the Indigenous point of view. And we continue to support and build our relationship by visiting this BIPOC museum on the reservation, continually educating ourselves as a community and as an extended community. And then when they need their allies to come and stand with them, we go and stand with them. When this beech tree was in danger of being cut down and destroyed because of some new utility line being installed, they called out, we went, we joined them in prayer, and then the the project was shut down. So it's really all about relationships and how we can work together. And the Land Justice Futures Project has given us the resources to really, as contemplatives, to really look at, our land history and their resources that they have provided to do racial history assessments, to do the story of our land, and then a retreat that the team provides for us, bringing in the voices of the BIPOC people, has really been a transformative experience. So much so that other groups of sisters are now getting together and starting to think about this and saying, okay, what are we going to do? We had this information from working with this group, but how can we reflectively really pray about where we are and where we need to go so that racial healing and ecological healing can happen. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Joan. And I just want to note too that the Land Justice Futures Project, as I briefly mentioned, works with all sorts of women religious communities. And I think one of the things that's really powerful about it is it's hopeful, number one, it's imaginative, and it also really invites communities into a kind of a relationship of mutuality, of saying and understanding that every congregation's story or stories of their land, the land that they eventually obtained, is distinct. And so while it may be the reality on Long Island and Hampton Bays that the Sisters of St. Joseph have been present there, we also know that Sisters of St. Joseph have communities in other parts of the country and other parts of the world, and those stories are also distinct. So at this point, I just want to invite briefly Peggy, who is Sister St. Joseph from Boston, and she's the JPIC promoter up there. And you all are you're in your first year, so in a different stage of being part of the Focus community. So if you just want to share some highs, lows, questions, things that you all are wrestling with in Boston, knowing that you're not on Hampton Bays, and that's great. Like you're living into your own experience.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, the story from Brentwood is just so wonderful, and every time I hear it, I learn new things about it, and it's a hard act to follow, I have to admit. As Lisa mentioned at the beginning, this is so related to the whole Laudato Si movement. And that's basically the reason that we decided to get involved in it. We have a Laudato Si implementation committee. And that committee has, of course, been looking at all kinds of ways in which we want to fulfill the goals of Laudato Si. Back in 1984, we did, one of our chapters did a corporate stance on care for the earth, behalf of the earth. And so we've been moving in that direction pretty steadily, slowly and steadily, for all these years. And then Laudato Si really gave us a bolt to say, what more can we do? And so one of the things that the implementation committee talked about was this Land Justice Futures program. And so we decided to get involved in it. I'll just mention a few of the kind of nitty-gritty things that are involved in the program. They really recommend strongly that any community that's going to become a focus community have the support of their leadership team. And so a few of us got together and set up a time with the leadership team to put out a proposal that we become one of the focus communities. We got strong support from our leadership team, thankfully. And then our next step was to get more broader congregational support. And so we made a presentation at one of our congregational gatherings, and again, just felt a great sense of support among the community that we go ahead with this. And so we did put in our application last December, got approval in January, and began in February. So we are fairly new at it. It does, one thing I would say about it is that it does involve a great commitment of time among the core team. Each community is asked to have a core team of 3 to 5 people, preferably with one of that team being from the leadership team of the congregation. Marion Batho is the liaison from our leadership team. But the core committee, there are bi-monthly meetings with all of the focus communities that are involved in the program. But previous to those meetings, there's homework to be done. And that also often involves either watching a video or doing some reading and reflection questions. Then the team gets together to discuss the reflection questions. And we have a coach from the land justice group that meets with us. And then we have the bi-monthly meeting. So time-wise, there's a pretty big commitment. One of the things they do is at some point during it's a 2-year program for each community. At some point during the 2-year program, they do a 2-day workshop with your full congregation, optional, as many people as would want to. We haven't had that yet. We've got it coming up in November 1st and 2nd. And we'll have a good number of sisters, associates, agrégés, partners in mission, so that we're kind of together on the same page as we proceed on this. Before we actually began the program, we had to decide on which one of our properties we would focus on during the time. We chose our property in Newton, which has an elementary school, a Montessori school, a spiritual ministry center, and a small house where we have a refugee family living. And so we've been trying to dig into the kind of history of that property. And it's not as easy as you would think. I mean, it's easy to look at the time that we've had the property because we have a very good archive system. But we're trying to dig deeper into that to see, how did we acquire the property? Who had it before us? How did they get it? So it involves a good bit of work, and we're trying to involve more people with us, so that it's not just totally the land justice group that's doing this. The second thing I would say is that it's taken us in a little different direction than I think we had anticipated at the beginning. I think when we got into it, as I mentioned, we were talking about Laudato Si and back to our corporate stance on behalf of the earth. And so I think we thought that it was probably going to be more in the looking at ecological and sustainability issues. But in fact, at least so far, it's been more around the racial justice issues and the reality of the doctrine of discovery and the effect of colonization and the impact that colonization has had on, how properties, 98%, it says 98% of the private property in the world is owned by the Catholic Church. And I think it's a similar percentage of the property in the United States is owned by white people. So it's taken us in that direction, and it's very eye-opening, and it's very challenging. And so we're hoping to just be able to continue to dig deeper and deeper in that. I think I'll stop here because I think we're beginning to run out of time, right, Lisa?
Yeah, no, that was great. I so appreciate, both of you have very distinct perspectives on your experience in this cohort model. And the thing I want to flag is that they're focused communities. So again, it's open to any religious congregation in the United States. Their application process is open now. So one of the things we wanted to do was just tell our communities about it. And of course, I do that through the Justice Promoters. But if you're on this or watching this later and you're like, man, is our community doing anything about this? Like, maybe get in contact with your justice office or a member of your leadership team and say, hey, is this something that we might explore? And I think part of what Peggy brings up is a good point of these things unfold and we don't know what will emerge. But I think reckoning with the realities of racism and colonialism and extractivism in this country is the big work for us. And it's not easy, but I think the Land Justice Features in particular, this endeavor is important because it's done in community. And so I just want to leave you on that note of we never can do this work alone. I hope you've been a little bit inspired, a little bit challenged, have learned something about some of the great work that our communities are up to. And I highly recommend checking out some of the resources that are offered and already cataloged and available on the Land Justice Features website. And with that, I will just let folks know that the next time we'll gather is October 16th for the next installment of the Dear Neighbor series. So I just want to thank Sister Peggy, Sister Joan, so much for being here and for sharing about your experience. It was delightful to have you here. So I will stop the live stream in a moment and feel free to come off of mute.